So, welcome everybody to this Art of Gridding blog. And this week we are going to be diving into Gate One, and we're speaking to David Holliday, who's one of the partners at Gate One. So, David, firstly, just a huge thanks for your time.
Thanks, Dom. Real pleasure to join you for this blog and talk a little bit about what we do and how we've started on the journey of Method Grid.
Yeah, no, absolutely. And what we're going to focus on this one is we're going to kick off and get a little bit more about Gate One. David's going to sort of talk us through, exactly what kind of market they serve, their service propositions, their focus. But we're going to focus on a really interesting day that the team at Gate One did recently, which they called a hackathon, and essentially they got everybody out of the office for a working day and dedicated it to populating Method Grid, and made it an explosion of their sort of toolbox and intellectual property as a result. So I'm really fascinated to hear a bit more from David, how that day was put together, how it was facilitated, the results of doing so, because I think as a concept it was a really excellent idea, and I think many of you will be interested to maybe do similar. So David, if you don't mind though, just to give us a bit of context, maybe you could say a bit more about Gate One, a bit more about the clients you serve and the your expertise.
Sure, thanks, Dom. So hopefully you can see our page. I put it in terms of an overview of some of our team here. We're about 5 years old now. Started out the business. There were 4 of us who founded it. We were really looking at a time when business transformation and digital transformation were really starting to eclipse each other and come together. So as a firm, we really wanted to major on helping our clients work with their digital transformation agenda, look at how they redesign their operating models and deliver lasting change that counts. So we've grown the business to about 65 consultants over that period of time. Our clients tend to be a mix of cross-industry, but working really with major FTSE 100 and 250 organisations, as well as some in the public sector as well. And part of the essence that we were looking to do when we set up the firm was not just focus externally on a whole set of client propositions, but really start to challenge ourselves to do things differently from an internal perspective. The type of people that we were looking to attract on was really those people who've done their hard yards and their experience in some of the larger big firm organisations, but are looking for a more entrepreneurial mindset. So really from the off, we were looking to make sure that we had an outlet for that entrepreneurial mindset from the different people joining. So we set up an incubator, which is really part of the DNA of the firm as well. So part of that really is being able to look at new business ideas and being able to launch those alongside the core consulting mothership. So we've had about three companies now that we've started to launch, and as you'll see when we talk about Method Grid, the value for us, as well as launching those businesses, really to get that experience back into the organisation as well, which will make people better consultants in the long run too.
No, brilliant. And if you, maybe now we could just jump into, the sort of, how the concept of the day came about, David, and how, started off with how you sort of structured it.
Yeah, absolutely. I'll just jump to a couple of slides we actually used on the day, and the reason we chose Hackathon is obviously it's now getting to become much more of a well-trodden path for organisations to run internal and external hackathons. I think the key success of any hackathon is you end up with working software and solutions by the end of the day or the end of the period. So we really took that as part of our approach to accelerate getting all of our client delivery and methods onto Method Grid as the platform of choice. So for us, the challenge was being able to organise into 5 or 6 of our key client propositions, digital being one of those, change management, operating model design, and rather than just talk about the improvements that we wanted to make in those services and those propositions, really use Method Grid as a vehicle to start uploading key documents, key approaches, key lessons learned. And so for us, it's been a real accelerator to kick forward in all of our propositions.
I love the image on that slide. I can see your managing partner on the front and centre, and I guess that talks to one of your values of not taking yourselves too seriously.
Yeah, that was certainly a good day just before Christmas, so you can see probably a few Christmas jumpers on show as well. So yeah, culture is a real key part of us, and we kind of use these gateway events every quarter to make sure we bring the firm back together. So it made perfect sense for us to drive IP and proposition development and underpin that with Method Grid when we did this just towards the back end of March.
I think it's a really interesting broader point, David, as well, about the sort of discipline of just getting a whole team away every quarter, at least, or to have the sort of to work on the business as opposed to in it, and I think it's probably a key part of your success, isn't it, that you've invested in that as well. But if you could jump us into how the day was set up, that would be great.
Sure. So, I mean, we basically had a number of objectives as we went through the day, and it was an overnight. So we started on the Thursday night. It was quite interesting because we had several clients come in and talk about their experience of working with us, what they felt was, the key USPs for us as an organisation that we needed to hold on to, and where, the improvements might need to be from their perspective. And I think that was really valuable to get that client perspective before we then had a day of driving our propositions. So we wanted to focus on our clients and always bear them in mind. And this was a chance, given we've had quite a few new joiners over the last 12 months as well, to really make sure people fully understood exactly where all of our key propositions and IP are, and then use the day itself to really drive further enhancement and development of those propositions. And just, as you mentioned it before, these gateways are a key cornerstone of our culture. Really important that everybody gets back together and connects and has fun. So very much hands-on working event that we wanted to achieve, but with some real product by the end of the day.
No, brilliant. Yeah, and if you could sort of step us through how the day was.
Sure. So I've just pulled out a couple of the slides we used on the day, but I think several people know about Method Grid in the organisation, and we've set up a number of our proposition leads as architects and builders before we launch more broadly. But we spent a bit of time talking about what Method Grid is, why we've now chosen this as our platform of choice. We previously used other tools that haven't really quite hit the mark in terms of being user-friendly and allows us to quickly move forward with our proposition. So this was quite important just to be a good level setter across the organisation, so people understand the purpose of the tool and how we could use it to drive forward. I think probably for us the key was, before we got everybody launched into Method Grid, was just being really clear how we wanted to govern it and organise it. So we've got an overall owner within the firm for knowledge, and their job is really to make sure that when we are building out new propositions, it's done to a consistent architecture. There is some rigor required.
That's one of your consulting team, David, is it?
Correct. Yeah, that is definitely one of our consulting team who's taken on that internal role for us.
On a rotating basis, presumably, or?
I think it will rotate.
Yeah.
I think part of the vision for us is that role becomes increasingly less required as we go forward, and we get a maturing, Method Grid offering, because it's really at the proposition level that we're trying to get those proposition leads to be 100% responsible for creating and curating their content. So I see less and less need to govern it at a macro level, and becoming more and more within the propositions once we've got that consistency of approach and framework understood.
Got it. And the sort of process here was essentially setting out the process of the day.
It was partly setting out the process of the day, and also to describe, if we were incepting new propositions, that they would follow this standard process. So when we went into the day, I think it's probably worth pointing out that there were only one or two of the methods that had moved forward, given this is quite a new tool for us. So almost this was level setting the team to be able to say we've got two or three that have moved on into initial population, as you can see on this slide, and others that are at the very beginning of breaking down and agreeing the architecture, which we found most helpful to do offline and use whiteboards before you then get everybody loose on the tool itself.
I think just a couple of things to that are noteworthy here is, I mean, that point around well, clearly, a demonstration is great, and making sure people are aware of the what's possible and the art of the possible is important before people get going, and even 20-30 minutes doing that sets the scene perfectly. And then this architecture of the initial framework, and we've seen this over and over again where accounts teams, organisations have just taken some time out, almost around a whiteboard, around a flip chart, to sort of have that initial conversation about what is the best structure for this particular methodology, procedure. And it doesn't need to be 100% right, but just that time up front invested hugely pays back, because then it's almost like people have mental pigeonholes for where everything lives, and it just opens another level of development. So I totally get that, and I really like the idea of a sort of a team that's kind of not completely is one step back, that can review, but also just make sure there's a coherency across the entire portfolio of grids. Yeah, it's really nice.
I think that's really important, both from a general navigation and look and feel point of view. So, if you have 101 guides, where are they? They're in a consistent format and place in your grid. So it just makes sure users can, access things a lot quicker, and they have a consistent feel, even down to, having a standard way of representing an element. So again, it just makes sure that people are focused on the content rather than the navigation. I think the other thing that this will hopefully help us to do is be able to link up effectively between each of the propositions. They're each developing their own at this stage, but they've already started to have the conversations about the links across to other propositions. So being able to design it and have some oversight of those various propositions as they go through that development is quite key, because then it will make it a lot easier to link elements later on.
No, I got it. Smart. Yeah, no, please just keep going. This is really interesting.
We had a number of design themes that we wanted to look at, and I think there's for us, even if you look at stages and themes, back to what you said before, Dom, about taking some time away from the tool itself to organise. It's really important that we got the right stages and themes understood, the right framework, if you like, to then populate within it. I touched on this already, but our elements, are standardised, so they will cover things like what's the overall purpose of this element, what are the areas of content and the top tips and hints, and any supporting reference material. So just having that design once is quite important. And I think, being able to get to a point where, we have our standard overall guidance for new joiners as well, it is really important too. So, for us, this is serving two purposes. One is enabling a more consistent approach to delivery to our clients, but when we get new joiners, to be able to induct them very, very quickly into our client delivery methods, so they can get up to speed as quickly as possible.
Yeah, no, a great set of principles.
So we use the analogy of a hack to drive the teams forward, and I think part of what we were doing, you can see a few photos in here. These are some of the teams that are doing two things during the day. One was looking at our external thought leadership, and the other was driving our internal methods using method grids. So some of the teams here are designing offline their grids, their stages, their themes within it. Some are also working on thought leadership events. There's some further examples here, and for us it was a really useful day, and a really I think there's a real strong appetite to redo these type of events, not just when we get together as one group every quarter, but also to have individual proposition teams to take some of the ways of working around almost that hack mentality and to collaborate using the method grid tool. So, I know already coming out of the end of March, we've had several of the proposition teams meet up and, have method grid out in front of them and a number of people building, elements as they go, which I think is really useful because it means that the conversation quickly moves away from whiteboards and IOUs for different tools and templates that people might have sitting on their hard drive to actually getting it all onto the system really quickly.
No, great. And then I can see the classic flip chart and post-it notes in the top right there, and I think that is nothing really beats that as one way of doing that initial architecture, and the initial population. So again, time really well spent, no doubt.
Absolutely. We had a bit of a competition running through the day, and ultimately we ended up with across some of our propositions, overall 240 odd elements created, over 100 documents shared and uploaded, and on the right hand side a number of thought leadership pieces that were worked on, in some cases completed, and others mapped out. So in terms of tangible output from the day, bearing in mind it was probably about 5 hours of productive time once you factor in other parts that we had in the agenda. It really helped kick things forward for us, and now we're in a space where we've started to get a number of our propositions on method grid, and get ready for wider firm launch.
No, I've got to say, and just you've obviously given me a privileged sort of login, so I can take a look at your library for this podcast, and what the explosion of IP in one day, just remarkable. And I know that's then created a momentum, and it's building on that. But I think that's a brilliant slide just to show how 5 hours well constructed with a lot of clearly intelligent heads together has made a massive forward step in the IP of Gate 1.
I think probably the other thing I would say to anybody considering running these types of events is be really clear who your proposition leads are, and do the planning in advance. So we were working with each of the proposition areas in digital, in change and target operating model, making sure that they understood who was going to be there on the day and for how long, and breaking it down into really small teams. Because I think once you get down into teams of 2 or 3, you're able to really focus on content creation. Anything more than that, and it feels like the emphasis is more on discussion and debate. So I think that pre-planning is also essential to get the most out of a day like that.
No, great tip. And just a quick sort of sidebar comment here would be that, I speak to a lot of business leaders, and particularly in the sort of management consultancy space, who are slightly quizzed by this concept of service propositions. I mean, clearly, for some it's very well understood, and Gate 1, would be an example. But, some are kind of unsure even what is meant by a service proposition. But essentially, it's an area of your expertise. It's almost one of, on your menu of offers, talking to a market need, how you would go and deliver value to that client. And, if you purport to have that expertise, you should have a detailed approach, methodology and toolbox as to how you then deliver your skills. And, not only because it helps explain to a prospect client how you would go about an intervention, but also, as David mentioned earlier, so that when you actually deliver it, you deliver it in a really consistent, ever improving way. And unless you've got a centralized repository for how you go about it, you've got no hold on how you can continuously improve it. So I think it's probably a bigger podcast in its own right, but I just wanted to sort of have that sidebar point made. David, I'm conscious of time, and I know you've got to shoot off, I believe, for some calls soon. But if you could, that's a great sort of, I think, capture for the day. But maybe you could just give us 1 or 2 examples of, what came out, and actually look at your method grid platform.
Sure. Let me just jump to the grid page. So, we've started to play around with a number of different grids on here. The the green ones, if you like, are our client-facing propositions that we are working through and at different levels of maturity, and the pink ones are being able to use the tool really for a number of internal playbooks around sales. We will also be using it to create, an induction process for our team, which is there in parts elsewhere, but actually using the rigor of Method Grid will be really helpful. And I'll touch on our incubator playbook, which is essentially the culmination of all of our experience, IP, lessons learned, having gone through the process of not only launching 3 different businesses alongside Gate 1, but also, the many more that are at different earlier stages of assessment and investment.
No, sure. So, and just at a summary level, you can see, there's a library there of 8 service propositions, and I think that's essentially 80% of your grids are focused on your clients, and I think that makes complete sense. But you've already got a couple of grids which are talking to internal procedures, and the incubators, I think, are really fascinating differentiator for Gate 1, and it makes a lot of sense. You're starting to map that out as well. But maybe you could jump us into one of each, David. Maybe you could jump us into a client-facing one, and then one of the internal ones.
I'll just jump into customer experience, which is a key part of our digital offering, and we spend quite a lot of time now pulling this together, with our key client CX stages that would typically happen on a client engagement, from upfront definition and analyses, through to high level and detailed design, and then on into delivery. They all start with an overall CX guide, which is almost the first go-to for someone who's trying to familiarise themselves with the proposition area. If you go into here, there is a piece on the purpose of it. There's some best practice examples. There's our 101 guide. There's some of the key experts for this proposition area. Amber is our digital lead. Tim's obviously our MD. So we'll build on this as we go. But as a kind of an initial one-stop shop for CX, that is certainly something that's starting to work for us.
And you were saying earlier, David, that essentially you're using the 101 guides at summary level for a grid, and you're tagging expertise at the summary grid level at the moment, and you feel that that's currently fine, because the experts at the sort of within the 101 guide are essentially therefore the experts of every subgrid element within. But down the line, possibly there may be some more granularity to that. But at the moment, you're just tagging it at the grid level.
Yeah, at the grid level, it works for us, and I think we, as a firm, are reasonably clear who our key experts are in each of our propositions. But you're right. I think as we start to scale and grow, Dom, even further, we will start to potentially re-examine. Do we need different experts being identified for different sub-elements? But at this early stage of population, I think it's really important for particularly new joiners into the organisation to know who the primary go-to experts are. So that's why we've done it at an overall guide level.
No, great. Then maybe we could jump into.
So
actually, it's worth before we jump off, David. Just maybe the labelling you're using here. Just the I can see a number have got the green dots on.
Well, it was really important to distinguish as we started to build out each of our propositions, which of the elements have had some work done within them. And so the dots are a simple red, amber, green. So as you can see, for our customer experience, there's a lot of work that's already started. There's a lot that have got green dots. And then there's others where we know we need to, we've identified they've become a key part of the overall framework. And the next stage of build out will focus on making sure there's content in each of those elements, and those will in turn turn to green.
No,
so it's just a good interim measure for us to be able to show the progress.
No, we've seen a lot of people using the device just exactly for that, just to sort of help them track through the work in progress of the actual build out of the grid, and then when they finish the grid, the labeling will be used potentially for something else. But it's a nice way of doing it.
Yeah, and I think if we go into customer journey maps, we've started to also see that this is a really good way of very quickly capturing from each of our live engagements top tips and hints.
Yeah.
So this will, I'm sure, expand as we start to build out further, and we'll also add in more rich content and images. But already you can start to see that there's enough on here for any delivery team to get going with some level of consistency, which I think is absolutely critical for us as we're a growing organisation to have that standard approach out to our clients.
No, great. And then do we have time just to jump maybe into one of your internal grids. Just have a quick look. Is there one more example?
Sure. So I'll just jump to our incubator playbook on here. So hopefully you can see that, Dom.
Yeah.
We spend quite a lot of time looking at how we create from basic idea all the way through to launching a new business. What is the process? And you can see some of the stages across the top. How we apply seed corn funding and go out to wider investment and match that to the level of maturity of the organisations and ideas that are coming through. And there's a number of themes that you can see down the left-hand side to do with people, culture, mindset, and partnerships, products, services, how you market, the new company that you're setting up, and quite a lot on stories and experience and learning. So, for us, part of the value of the incubator workstream is not necessarily just the companies that may launch and become successful, but also for the people who get involved in that to really capture and share their lessons on starting up new businesses and bringing that back into the services that we provide to our clients as well. So we see the incubator playbook as being as critical as our front-facing client delivery ones.
I think this is an obvious candidate for a follow-up chat with you, Dave, because I think the incubator playbook and the incubator sort of offering of Gate One is such a unique differentiator in its own right. But we could easily spend another 20-30 minutes opening that up. Maybe that's one for the for the future. But
Sure.
Great, thank you for that. And as I say, conscious of time, and I just wanted to fundamentally get across the gist of how you guys have done the hackathon, how has led to this explosion already of some really, you can see already very coherent both externally facing service propositions and internal procedures. Maybe just if we a couple of questions, if you don't mind, David, just to sort of bring this to a close. First question I typically always ask is, are there any other sort of high-level tips? I mean, you're a couple of months into this now as yourselves. I think already demonstrating some great practice. The hackathon, being a brilliant idea. Is there any other sort of general advice you would pass on to people that are literally just coming onto the platform?
I mean, we've touched on it earlier a little bit, but I do think as a firm, you need to really think about where IP sits in your organisation, and that should really be owned at the exec level, and have somebody driving that with a clear understanding of the team around that, not just at an overall level, but within each proposition. So I guess you can put that under the overall banner of governance to make sure you're really, really clear how you want to build it out.
That's a really key point. Do you on that? Do you have a director or partner on the board that is overall in charge, and then obviously your proposition leads?
Absolutely. So I lead it from an overall board perspective, and we have an overall knowledge lead who drives the consistent approach to method grids as one particular area, and then we've got very clear roles covering each of our proposition leads. The idea being that they should be the single point of contact and really focus on the curation of their particular grids. So there's some sense of controlled ownership there. It doesn't stop anybody from providing suggestions and updates and potential materials, but you need to have a single kind of point of accountability for what ultimately sits on those grids and how those things continuously evolve.
I think that's a really, really fundamental point, well made, which is the unless there's a sort of a leader in the business that's really taking responsibility for this at the sort of board level, it's one of those conversations that just never really gets due energy or focus. So no, I think if no other point is landed, I think that's a really central one, David. So thank you for that. And then I guess in a somewhat selfish way, I guess I always ask guests on the blog, what features would you petition to sort of have at the top of our development stack going forward?
I think there's probably three things for me, Dom. One is further development to allow us to reskin this so that it really feels like a Gate One tool, down to being able to attach more of our brand logo and corporate colours into the tool itself. I think is important. So further functionality around skinning, I think, is key. I think the second thing would be being able to navigate and organise our grids into different families. So if you go on the landing page, being able to group certain client-facing grids together, being able to organise our internal grids, in a different layer, would be really helpful. And then, a number of our clients are already asking this, but we help a number of organisations to build their own improved capabilities around digital, around change, around leading programs, and so being able to license this for our clients and to change our methods to fit their environment would be really helpful as well.
No, great, and just to assuage you that we are hearing those fairly consistently from the fantastic beta community we have, and the development team actually as of this week go full time. So we're really hoping that everyone will see an increase in the sort of the release of features, and all of those, David, are in close proximity. They're all at the top. I mean, the client area. Being able to segregate and have controlled access with your clients is a really we see a really key one, particularly again for the professional service focus we have, and for consulting firms especially so within that category. Very shortly actually we're looking to just reskin the labels. I know it's a sort of step one, but for people to change the label colours to their own corporate palette is something we'll introduce quickly, and we'll have them broader changes thereafter. And absolutely being able to structure the grid library, being able to drop and drag grids around, categorize into folders is something we're looking to design as well at the moment. So great, no, thank you very much. You've pushed each of those further up the stack for us. We'll get on to that. And David, I'm really conscious of your time, and just to say, finally, just a huge thank you. I mean, what you've essentially done, I think, is Gate One, and I have the privilege of knowing a number of the team over there, and hugely successful firm, growing very, very steadily, deservedly so. Deliver some great work, and I think what others may have got a glimpse of is just how much firms that operate in that really premier way as Gate One do, invest in the development of IP. And I know it's early days on the MethodGrid platform, but I'm sure viewers will have really gained from seeing the energy, the governance, the focus that you bring to this part of your business. So David, a huge thank you.
Thanks, Tom. It's been a pleasure.
Stay well.